It was a Tuesday when everything shifted. I remember the afternoon sun streaming through the windows as I moved through my daily routine, watching dust particles dance lazily in the golden rays. The air carried the scent of lemon polish and old books from the corner shelves. I was humming softly to myself, fluffing cushions and straightening picture frames, when I heard the front door open. My son-in-law, David, stepped inside. He'd been out handling some errands, and the smell of fresh air and subtle cologne came with him. "Hi, Catherine," he said, pausing just inside the entrance with a grocery bag in his hand. Something in his tone made me turn. There was a weight there, a hesitation, as though he was gathering courage for something important. I gestured for him to come further in. As he set the bag down on the counter, I noticed him looking around the room with unusual attention. The slightly crooked lamp, the pile of magazines, the worn surface of the coffee table. "You notice everything," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then he looked directly at me and asked something I hadn't expected. "Catherine, do you ever feel like there's a part of yourself you keep locked away? Something you've never really shown anyone?" I stopped what I was doing, cloth still in hand. His tone carried weight, almost urgency, but also tremendous respect. This wasn't small talk. I set down my cleaning cloth and gestured toward the couch. "I suppose everyone does," I said carefully. "What makes you ask?" He sat down, his fingers absently smoothing the fabric of the shopping bag. "Lately, I've been thinking that life's too short to keep everything inside. Sometimes just talking to someone who really listens makes all the difference." His honesty caught me off guard. The atmosphere in the room shifted, becoming tender and intimate, though not in a romantic way. This was two people recognizing each other's humanity despite the family boundaries between us. I understood immediately that this wasn't just casual conversation. It was an invitation to go deeper with someone I genuinely trusted. The sunlight seemed to brighten against the faded curtains as I began speaking more freely than I had in years. I shared regrets I'd buried, small victories I'd never celebrated, quiet anxieties I'd dismissed as unimportant. David listened completely, his attention never wavering, occasionally nodding with real understanding. When I finally paused, a peaceful silence filled the space, the kind that feels rich rather than empty. Something fundamental had shifted between us, and within me as well. After he left, the house felt different, lighter somehow. Walking past the living room in the following days, the streaming sunlight seemed more vibrant, the floating dust more like celebration than neglect. His question kept echoing in my mind. "Do you ever feel like there's a part of yourself you keep locked away?" I started noticing details I'd overlooked before. The floorboards creaking reminded me of childhood afternoons in my parents' home. The curtains moving in the breeze carried garden fragrances inside. Even my own voice sounded different when I read aloud. More intentional, more willing to explore deeper feelings. Several evenings later, David returned with a small box of pastries. "I thought you might enjoy these," he said casually, though his eyes held that same quiet depth. "No particular reason. Just wanted to visit," I laughed softly, placing the box on the table. "You're being too kind," I said, though I meant something beyond the gesture itself. His presence felt steadying, like those rare conversations with old friends when time disappears and you forget everything else. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the refrigerator hum and the distant sounds of traffic. Then he spoke hesitantly. "I've been thinking about what I asked before, about hiding parts of ourselves. Sometimes we conceal things not from shame, but from fear that nobody will truly understand." I nodded, feeling emotion tighten in my throat. Yes, exactly that. I realized how desperately I'd wanted to be truly seen beyond the surface roles I played, the cooking, the housekeeping, the automatic social pleasantries. David wasn't judging or trying to fix anything. He was simply present, creating space where I could unfold safely. We talked quietly at first about seemingly trivial things, favorite books, his childhood neighborhood, my summer memories. But gradually the conversation deepened. We shared minor regrets, subtle yearnings, things I'd hidden even from my own daughter. The house seemed to contract around us, becoming more intimate, as if it too wanted to witness this exchange. When he left that evening, I felt an unusual mixture of anticipation and tranquility. Something was awakening inside me, something tender yet insistent, an unexpected spark of self-discovery. I realized that genuine connection doesn't always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it arrives quietly through a glance, a question, or simply being present when someone dares to speak their truth. For the first time in years, I felt like I was no longer holding back, not because circumstances demanded it, but because I chose not to. The following days felt suspended in a soft awareness. David's visits had marked me subtly, and I found myself perceiving everything more acutely. The sunlight creating golden patterns on the rug, the jasmine scent drifting through open windows, the wall clock's rhythmic ticking, always there, but suddenly feeling like a heartbeat I could sense. One Saturday morning, he arrived without knocking, entering with the easy confidence born from years of family connection, yet somehow stepping into a new, delicate space between us. "Thought you might want company," he said, leaning against the doorframe. His tone was light, but that quiet intensity flickered in his eyes again. We settled on the couch and I poured coffee, watching steam curl up. "Ard." The silence felt comfortable, like a well-worn blanket radiating warmth and trust. We discussed small things initially, beloved recipes, movies from decades past, but soon the conversation drifted toward more personal territory. "You know, Catherine," David said softly, tracing his cup's rim, "I've always admired how you hold everything together. But I wonder, do you ever think about what you truly want? Not for others, just for yourself." The question struck unexpectedly. I realized I'd spent so many years living for others, my children, my friends, my work, that I'd forgotten my own desires. My heart accelerated not with anxiety, but with strange excitement. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I suppose I've been afraid to even ask myself." David nodded, his gaze gentle but steady. "It's okay to be afraid, but sometimes just asking the question opens doors you didn't know existed." Something shifted inside me then. A part of myself that had been quiet, buried beneath routine and obligation, stirred awake. I began sharing things I hadn't voiced in years, dreams I'd abandoned, books I'd longed to write, places I'd wanted to visit but never dared. David listened completely, not interrupting, not judging, simply holding space for my words to breathe. The more I spoke, the more alive I felt. Tension I hadn't realized I carried began melting, replaced with gentle warmth, a sense of being seen and understood in ways I hadn't experienced in decades, as afternoon sunlight angled AC. Ross the room, catching in the lines of his face, I felt a connection that was tender, respectful, and profoundly human. We didn't rush. There were no grand gestures or dramatic confessions, just quiet moments of recognition, laughter at small memories, and conversation that sinks into your bones and makes you feel less alone. When he left that day, I felt as though I'd discovered a hidden part of myself, a corner of my heart that had been waiting quietly for someone to acknowledge it. That evening, walking through the living room as the sun dipped behind the trees, I realized my home no longer felt like just a place. It felt like a witness, a companion to my awakening. In sharing these quiet, vulnerable moments with David, I'd begun rediscovering not only myself, but the subtle beauty of connection. The kind that doesn't shout but whispers and lingers long after it's gone. The weeks passed gently, almost imperceptibly, but each encounter left its mark. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic revelations. It was the small things, the quiet moments of understanding, the way our conversations lingered after he'd gone. I noticed a new rhythm in my days, a subtle lightness in my movements, a soft patience in how I moved through the house. One afternoon, while rearranging books on the living room shelves, warm sunlight painting stripes across the carpet, David arrived carrying a small journal. "I thought we could share something," he said, a little shy. "Just a small project if you're interested." I smiled, and we settled on the sofa with tea, the room's quiet comfort wrapping around us. We began writing thoughts, reflections, dreams we'd tucked away. It felt strangely intimate, not physically, but in how our thoughts intertwined, how our words filled spaces that had once been silent. As we wrote, I realized something profound. This connection wasn't about conventional desire, it was about recognition, about two people honoring each other's inner lives, about creating space where vulnerability could exist without fear. In that space, I discovered courage I hadn't known I possessed, the courage to embrace my own story, my own truths, without hiding them. Later, after David had left, I sat in the living room, fading light spilling across the furniture, and felt deep gratitude. For the first time in years, I felt fully present in my own life. I thought about his initial question, "Do you ever feel like there's a part of yourself you keep locked away?" I realized I'd been holding back not from shame, but from habit. Now, gently, quietly, I was letting those parts of myself breathe. I understood that connection, the kind that touches the heart, doesn't always arrive loudly or dramatically. Sometimes it comes softly, like a breeze brushing against your skin. Subtle, but undeniable. When it does, it has the power to change how you see yourself and the world around you. As the seasons began to shift, so did I. The conversations with David continued, but they evolved into something even more meaningful, not just moments of vulnerability, but catalysts for action. One evening, as we sat in the familiar comfort of the living room, I shared something I'd been considering for weeks. "I've been thinking about that book I mentioned, the one I always wanted to write." David's face lit up. "You should do it." "I don't know where to start," I admitted. "Start anywhere," he said simply. "The beginning doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest." Those words stayed with me. That night, I pulled out an old notebook from the back of my desk drawer and wrote the first page. It was awkward and uncertain, but it was mine. And it felt like breathing after holding my breath for years. Over the following weeks, I wrote more. Sometimes David would visit and I'd share what I'd written, and he'd listen with that same complete attention, offering thoughts that always seemed to unlock something I hadn't quite articulated. But the change went beyond writing. I started saying yes to invitations I would have previously declined. I joined a book club at the local library. I reconnected with an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. I painted my bedroom a color I'd always loved but thought too bold. Each small choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One afternoon, my daughter stopped by unexpectedly. She stood in the living room, looking around with a puzzled expression. "Mom, something's different," she said. "You seem lighter, happier." I smiled. "I suppose I am. What changed?" I thought about it carefully. I stopped waiting for permission to be myself. I stopped hiding the parts of me I thought weren't acceptable or practical or appropriate for my age. She hugged me tightly. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." After she left, I realized something important. The connection I'd found with David, that initial spark of being truly seen, had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had happened within me. He'd opened a door, but I'd been the one who chose to walk through it. The next time David visited, I told him about my daughter's observation, about the changes I'd been making, about how different I felt. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "But I want you to know, this was always in you. I just helped you remember." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you for asking that first question, for listening, or seeing me." He squeezed my hand gently, a gesture of friendship, of respect, of genuine care. "Thank you for trusting me with your truth." We sat in comfortable silence, and I understood that this connection, this unexpected friendship, had given me one of the greatest gifts anyone can offer, the courage to be authentically myself. As autumn arrived, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, I found myself standing by the window one evening, watching leaves drift past. The house felt alive around me, not in a ghostly way, but in the way spaces feel when they hold happy memories, when they've witnessed transformation. I thought about the Thursday afternoon when everything had changed, when David had walked in and asked that simple, profound question. I thought about how a single moment of genuine connection had unraveled years of self-imposed silence. I realized that we often wait for permission to live fully. Permission from others, from circumstances, from some imagined future version of ourselves. But the truth is simpler and more radical. We already have everything we need. We just need to remember who we are beneath the layers of expectation and habit. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened it to find David with my daughter and her children, my grandchildren, all bundled up against the autumn chill. "We thought we'd surprise you," my daughter said. The kids wanted to see Grandma, as they tumbled inside, filling the house with laughter and noise and beautiful chaos. I caught David's eye. He smiled knowingly, and I smiled back. This was wholeness. Being able to maintain meaningful connections while living authentically. Being seen by someone who mattered while still being present for everyone else who mattered too. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the house grew quiet again, I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window. The stars were beginning to appear, distant and steady. I realized that, like those stars, certain moments in life shine quietly, but their light lasts far longer than you might expect. That evening, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen, understood, and alive in ways I hadn't in years. The unexpected connection I'd discovered with David had opened a door, not just between us, but within myself. A door to authenticity, to courage, and to the quiet joy of being truly present in my own life. And for the first time in a long time, I welcomed what came next with an open heart. I picked up my journal and wrote a single line: "Today I chose to be seen. Tomorrow I choose to be free." The light from the lamp pooled golden on the page, and I understood that this moment of clarity, of peace, of self-acceptance, was what I'd been searching for all along. Not someone to complete me, but the courage to complete myself. The house settled into its nighttime quiet, and I felt gratitude wash over me. For David's kindness, yes, for his willingness to truly listen and see me. But more than that, for the realization that I had the power all along to unlock my own happiness. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I glanced back at the living room one last time. The space where so many conversations had unfolded, where vulnerability had been met with respect, where transformation had quietly taken root. Tomorrow would bring new moments, new choices, new opportunities to live authentically. And I was ready for all of it. Because the light that changes everything isn't always external. Sometimes it's the light we allow to shine from within, illuminating all the hidden, beautiful parts of ourselves we'd forgotten were there. And once that light begins to glow, nothing can dim it again.